Hello, my name is Rose Kensington, and I wasn't supposed to survive. They said I was too fragile, too emotional, too naive to handle the family legacy. So while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed, tubes in my arms, unable to speak, my sister whispered into the phone with my husband. "Transfer the lake house now," she said. "She won't make it past noon." They declared me dead. Before I stopped breathing, they erased my name from the will, held a memorial I wasn't invited to. And worst of all, they smiled through it. But what happens when the woman you tried to bury wakes up? I've always believed silence had its own sound. A room full of whispers can feel louder than any scream. That morning, at least I think it was morning, my ears caught something I wasn't supposed to hear, not as a sister, and definitely not as a wife. The beeping of the heart monitor had become the rhythm of my half-conscious world. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't scream. But I could hear, "I'll end her by noon." The voice was familiar, low, steady, calculated. My sister, Isolde. She wasn't crying. She wasn't afraid. She was just deciding when I would stop existing. "I'll end her by noon." The words didn't register at first, not in the way they should have. It's strange how the brain tries to protect itself from shattering, even while it's already broken. I lay there, helpless, tubes in my arms, oxygen pumped into my lungs, a body that wouldn't respond. But my mind was screaming. And then the second voice, it wasn't hers. It was him. Darian, my husband. He didn't interrupt her, didn't gasp, didn't even shift in his chair. I know that silence. It's the silence of complicity, the kind that doesn't need to say a word to admit guilt. "Transfer the lake house now," Isolde added. Cold, efficient. She wasn't killing me out of passion or rage. This was business. The lake house. My father's legacy. My home. But my name. My breath caught in my throat, but my body still refused to cooperate. I couldn't even blink. But inside, something cracked. Not from fear, not from pain, from realization. This wasn't grief. This was greed. This wasn't about me dying. It was about what they would own once I was gone. I tried to move. I tried so hard I thought my brain would bleed. But nothing answered me. I was trapped. Alive, but buried beneath still skin. A day passed, or maybe more. I can't say for sure. But at some point, Darian came back. He held my hand like he used to when we'd sit on the porch at the lake house, talking about our retirement plans. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You were always so gentle," he murmured. "Maybe this is mercy." He kissed my forehead like I was already a memory. That same afternoon, I heard the nurse talking on the phone at the foot of my bed. "Mr. Whitlock has requested full authority over the estate," says Mrs. Kensington's condition is irreversible. We need the guardianship signed off before Friday. I don't know what hurt more, the lie or how easily it came. That night, the hospital TV buzzed quietly in the corner. I caught the end of a news clip. The Kensington Foundation is planning a small memorial for Rose Kensington, the late daughter of Richard Kensington, beloved founder of the Kensington Legacy Fund. Late, as in dead. They were erasing me in real time. A ceremony was held, one I wasn't in. A memorial brochure was circulated online. My name was misspelled. A press release declared Darian acting executor and primary representative of the Kensington estate. I was gone. On paper, I no longer existed, yet I was still breathing. Barely, but breathing. He still wore his wedding ring. He was still legally my husband, but he was no longer mine. Darian had switched sides in a war I hadn't even known we were fighting. The irony? I thought I'd lived a peaceful life. Never stirred drama, never chased control. All I wanted was to keep the lake house, the place where Dad taught me to fish, the cabin where I cried after my first heartbreak, the kitchen where I cooked Thanksgiving dinner just 3 months before he passed. But that house had become something else, a prize, a symbol, a threat to my sister, who had always hated how our father looked at me, with softness, with trust. She once told me, "Dad gave you all his affection, and me all his expectations." I hadn't understood the weight of that until now. She didn't just want the house. She wanted to delete the part of our history where I existed. But I remembered. Even if they scrubbed my name off every document, I remembered. I remembered Dad's letter, the one he left me in the cedar box upstairs, the one I never got the chance to read after his funeral. Isolde had taken it, saying she'd file it properly. Of course she had, but I knew its contents. Dad had told me once while sipping coffee on the porch, "If anything ever happens to me," he'd said, "don't let anyone tell you that house wasn't meant for you. It holds your soul, Mayros." I closed my eyes that night, not in defeat, but in decision. If I was going to survive this, it wouldn't be by crying out. It would be by listening. And then, one afternoon, I think it was raining, I heard them again. The nurse and another voice I couldn't identify, standing just outside the doorway. "They're going to push for medical guardianship this week," one said. "She hasn't responded in days." A beat of silence, then a sigh. "Let's get the papers ready. Isolde wants everything wrapped up before the end of the quarter." The end of the quarter. My life was a fiscal deadline. I focused everything I had left on one goal, one signal, one rebellion. Move, just one twitch, a finger, a toe, anything. And then, it happened. My right index finger, barely noticeable, shifted 1/4 of an inch. But it moved. The muscle in my finger had twitched, just once, but it was enough to rattle the silence I'd been stuck in for days. I wasn't sure if anyone had noticed. The nurse had come in shortly after to check my vitals, but she hadn't mentioned a thing. No sudden joy. No panicked call for a doctor. Nothing. And that was fine with me. If I was coming back to life, I'd rather do it quietly. That night, as the fluorescent light overhead buzzed, a storm rolled in beyond the hospital window. I could smell the faint dampness in the air. Lake Tahoe had that scent of pine and cold water that seeped into everything. It reminded me of home, of the lake house, and just like that, a memory grabbed hold of me. It had been the last summer with Dad, the last time the house felt alive. We had spent that week fixing the dock. His hands still knew how to do everything, drive in screws, sand down warped boards. Mine fumbled next to his, but he never said a word about it. He just smiled like he was passing something on. "You see that porch swing?" he said one evening as we sat with our coffee mugs balanced on our knees. "That's where I decided I wasn't going to sell the house." "Sell it?" I asked. "You were going to sell it?" "Briefly, years ago." But I thought, if I ever have to leave this world without saying goodbye, I want someone here who understands what this place means. And that person is you. It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that, but it was the last time he said it out loud. I remember feeling like he was handing me something invisible, something no one else could see. Not a document, not a deed, but something deeper. That house was never just wood and glass. It was legacy. It was roots. It was every quiet morning we spent fishing off the dock before the sun came up. Now it was a logo in a marketing video. The next morning, the nurse turned on the television in my room. She didn't ask if I wanted it on, just assumed I might want noise. And there she was, Isolde, standing in front of the lake house, now renamed the Kensington Wellness Retreat. She wore her usual white blazer and soft makeup, just enough to look natural, just enough to scream control. A soft instrumental played under her speech. "We're proud to open this sanctuary for those seeking healing, solitude, and renewal. This home once belonged to our beloved father, Richard Kensington, and we've transformed it into a haven." I stared at the screen. The walls were the same. The swing was gone. The dock had been replaced by a polished yoga deck, but the bones of it, the bones were mine. Then the screen shifted to a photo. Our family. Dad in the center, smiling. Isolde on one side, and where I should have been on the other, blurred. Cropped out just enough to make the image balanced, they said in the caption below. Balanced. Balanced without me. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I just watched. The voiceover continued. The Kensington sisters shared many summers here, especially Isolde, who helped maintain the grounds and stood by our father's side in his final days. A bold-faced lie. I was the one who had slept beside him during his last week, helping him to the bathroom, cleaning up the medication charts, checking his oxygen levels. She'd flown in the day before the funeral with dry eyes and a speech already printed. And now, not only had she rewritten the present, she was rewriting the past. You erased my face. You erased my name, but not my memory. My chest tightened. My breathing quickened. The monitor beeped louder for a second, and the nurse stepped in, glancing at the machines. "You okay, Ms. Kensington?" she asked, as if I could answer. I focused on slowing everything down. I was no use to myself if I lost control now. When she left the room, I tried to move my hand again. This time I could lift a few fingers. Progress. My mind kept returning to the photo, not because they cropped me out, but because they had the audacity to leave the rest of it intact, like I was a stain they could just blur away. A knock at the door interrupted my spiral. And a different nurse walked in, this one older, with calm eyes. She held a folder in her hands and approached slowly. "This was left by the Foundation's legal office," she said, placing it gently on the side table. "The attorney will be by tomorrow for signature." She didn't linger, didn't make eye contact, just turned and left. I stared at the folder. They were pushing guardianship paperwork, meaning they had already assumed I wasn't coming back, that I wouldn't fight. Isolde wanted this done before the quarter closed. That's how she thought. Clean, strategic, erase me from the books by Friday, report it as progress by Monday. I turned my head just enough to look at the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds still hung low, but there was a break in them, a shaft of light hitting the pine trees. A tear slipped from my eye, not from sadness, but from restraint, the kind of tear that burns. Inside, I wasn't grieving anymore. I was igniting. They thought they buried me, but they didn't know they planted something instead. The note sat on top of the folder, like it was waiting for me to open it with purpose, not fear. My hand trembled as I pulled it out and unfolded the paper slowly. The handwriting was neat. Too neat. Not the quick, almost illegible scribble I knew belonged to Dr. Mathers, the physician who'd treated my father for years. This name? I didn't recognize it. And the signature next to it, something about it felt off, forced, unnatural, like someone had traced it instead of signing it. The more I stared at it, the heavier the air in the room felt. Someone had gone through the trouble of forging a doctor's certification, not just any certification, one declaring me mentally unfit. That meant they were building their case piece by piece, dressing it up to look clean and legitimate. They were trying to make it impossible for me to fight back. And yet, I was still here. I shifted in bed, every muscle resisting me like it was made of rusted iron. I'd been lying still for too long, my body slow to answer the commands my mind screamed out. I forced my fingers to wrap around the folder, then pulled it close enough to flip through the remaining pages. That's when I saw it, a copy of a new will, one I'd never signed, one I'd never even seen. And the line that broke whatever part of me still wanted to believe this could be fixed quietly. All property and assets, including the Kensington Lake House and trust holdings, are hereby transferred to Isolde Kensington. My breath caught, but I didn't panic this time. I didn't scream inside my head. I didn't cry. I counted. I counted how many pages the folder had. I counted how many lies sat between those covers. And I began making a list. Names, people, places, events. Anything I could recall that might help me prove what I already knew was true. I didn't just lose control of my name. I had been deleted, and they were planning to seal the file before I could do anything about it, but I had one thing they didn't expect. Memory. It wasn't perfect. Some of the recent weeks were foggy, as if viewed through dirty glass, but the months before that, they were sharp. Too sharp. And my father's voice, clear as ever. Don't ever let someone else define your story, Mayrose. You're the only one who can finish your chapter. That memory carried me back to one specific moment. About a month after his funeral, I had gone to the family's longtime legal advisor, Mr. Fallon, to ask for a copy of Dad's original will. The receptionist at his office had looked up at me over her glasses, blinking like I was some ghost. "I'm sorry, Ms. Kensington, but, Mr. Fallon is unavailable at the moment." "I'll wait," I told her, adjusting the collar of my coat. "It's important." She hesitated, then said something that made my skin prickle. I think you may want to contact your sister about this. She's handling all estate access now. I narrowed my eyes. No, I want to speak with Mr. Fallon. He knows my father's intentions. I just want to review the documents myself. A few minutes later, another woman, someone from legal maybe, came out to the lobby with a thin, nervous smile. Hi, Ms. Kensington. Unfortunately, due to some updated psychiatric assessments recently submitted, we're not able to share any of the estate documents with you at this time. I froze. Excuse me? There's been a motion submitted that, temporarily limits your legal access pending review. It's procedural. Procedural? I snapped. Based on what? I haven't been diagnosed with anything. She held her hands up, palms out. I'm just relaying the legal position we're obligated to uphold, ma'am. If you'd like, you can follow up through your appointed guardian. That name landed like a hammer. Isolde, I said. The woman didn't respond, didn't have to. I had walked out of that office feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. I didn't call anyone after that. I didn't fight it. I just went home, curled up in bed, and tried to pretend that none of it had happened. Now, I regretted that silence more than anything, because that moment, that was when they had taken the first step in wiping me from every record that mattered. According to every file in the hospital, in the bank, in legal archives, I was gone, mentally incapacitated, unfit to make decisions, subject to guardianship under my sister, and now propertyless. That wasn't incompetence. That was intention. A knock pulled me out of the thought. The same nurse as before stepped in, holding a tray of breakfast I couldn't stomach. Anything I can get you, Miss Kensington? She asked gently. I nodded slowly, then struggled to speak. It took effort. A dry cough escaped before I could get a word out. Do you have a phone? I rasped. Her eyes widened slightly. Yes. I can have one brought to you. I nodded again. She left quickly, the door clicking shut behind her. The moment it closed, I pulled the folder closer and tucked it under the blanket beside me. My muscles were aching, but adrenaline was doing its job. I didn't have much time. Isolde wouldn't let this drag out. The papers, the lawyers, the medical reports, they were all lining up for a final strike. But she made one mistake. She didn't count on me waking up in time. I turned my head to the corner where a nurse's rolling cart stood, unattended for just a few minutes. On the top, a pair of latex gloves and a keycard. If I could get into the hallway, if I could find someone, anyone outside of her influence, a janitor, a volunteer, someone not on her payroll. It wasn't about running away. It was about being seen again. Before they buried me alive in paperwork, I had to show them I was still breathing. I stared at the sticky note resting inside the folder the nurse had delivered. The ink was thick, like it had been pressed onto the paper with more force than necessary, more spite than care. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, Isolde's. Erase this if you can. The document beneath it, my birth certificate. The original, not a copy. Still intact, still valid, still stating my full legal name in black and white. A name that had apparently become inconvenient. She hadn't left it here by mistake. It was a message, and not a subtle one. I sat in silence long after the nurse left. Outside the hospital window, the clouds were beginning to break apart, a patch of blue peeking through. It didn't match the weather inside me. Something colder than snow was spreading through my chest. They didn't just want my name, they wanted my death, and now, apparently, they had it. The next morning, the TV in my room, always on for background noise, never by request, switched to a local news channel. I barely looked at it until I heard my name, not the way you want to hear it. The Kensington Foundation, now under the sole leadership of Isolde Kensington, celebrates its expansion this weekend with the official opening of the newly renovated wellness retreat. A video clip began rolling. The lake house, my lake house. But it wasn't mine anymore, not in name, not in spirit. The porch had been stripped, the cedar exterior painted white. The old wind chime Dad hung above the front steps was gone. The place looked hollow, like it had been robbed of something sacred. The voiceover continued, casually devastating. This transition follows the tragic loss of Mayrose Kensington, younger daughter of the late philanthropist Richard Kensington, who passed away last month. The remote slipped from my hand and hit the floor. Passed away. I was watching my own obituary unfold on morning television. The anchor's tone didn't match the gravity of the words. It was chipper, polished. The ceremony this evening will include a dedication in her memory. Guests are expected from across the state, including leaders in finance, real estate, and mental health. They'd wrapped it up in ribbons and sold it as a story of healing. My death, fictional as it was, had become their branding. I leaned back in the bed, trying to breathe slowly. Every nerve in my body felt like it had been dipped in acid. And somehow, the beep of the monitor only made it worse. I wasn't just being written off, I was being turned into a talking point. And that night, they did it again. The gala streamed live on the Foundation's website. The nurse, unaware of the knife it would drive through my ribs, left the laptop on the tray beside me. Said it might cheer me up. What I saw nearly made me pull the IV out with my own hand. There she was, Isolde. On stage. Hair curled perfectly, dress the color of snow. She was smiling like grief had shaped her into someone wiser, someone more worthy. Mayrose, she began, was the gentlest of us, quiet, thoughtful, fragile. She loved that word. It let her mourn me without honoring me. She struggled with so much in her later years, but we hope that in this house, her spirit finds peace, that her legacy is one of resilience, not regret. Regret? Was that what she'd tell them about me? That I'd faded away in shame? The guests applauded politely. No one questioned her version of events. No one paused to ask why there hadn't been a funeral, or why there hadn't been a death certificate made public. The story was too neat, too pretty. She didn't just remove me from the will. She had remade me in her image, a cautionary tale. But I had my own tale to tell, and it wasn't over. I closed my eyes, trying to push the heat down before it boiled over. I had to stay calm. Everything inside me wanted to scream, wanted to claw through the window and yell, "I'm not dead!" Instead, I reached again for the folder she'd left, because that was her mistake. She was so sure I'd never get up again that she didn't mind leaving the evidence right at my feet. My fingers traced over the edges of the birth certificate, over the signature, over my name. This wasn't a legal document anymore. This was a declaration of war, and it reminded me of another time. Weeks before the accident. Back when I still thought reconciliation was possible, there had been a dedication event for the expansion of the foundation, a small ceremony, public enough to show face, but not glamorous enough for major press. I hadn't received an invitation, but I showed up anyway. Quietly, respectfully. I just wanted to be present. When I checked in at the front, the woman at the desk looked confused, scrolled through her tablet. Then she nodded, handed me a name tag from a stack, and said, "You must be with the vendor staff." I glanced down at the sticker in my hand. "Support staff, Emily Kensington." My chest tightened. I politely corrected her. "It's Mayrose." "Oh." She looked back at the screen, scrolled again, then shrugged. "That's the only Kensington we have." I didn't make a scene. I stuck the badge on anyway and walked inside. I stood in the back, behind the chairs, while Isolde gave her speech. She praised Dad, praised herself, gave a nod to Darian, calling him instrumental in helping carry out the Foundation's vision. My name never left her lips. She never even glanced toward the back of the room. But when the crowd began mingling, I saw her make a beeline toward the coordinator. She whispered something quickly. The woman glanced at me, then back at Isolde. A few minutes later, I was gently asked to stay in the service area. "There's just not enough space in the main floor," she said, eyes apologetic but firm. I left without arguing. At the time, I thought maybe it was just a mistake. Now I knew better. It had been a dress rehearsal for my disappearance. Back in the hospital, the door opened again. I turned my head slowly. The nurse stepped in, looking uneasy. "You had a visitor earlier," she said, avoiding my eyes. "She said she was your sister." My stomach sank. "She didn't want to wake you. Just asked us to leave something." She placed another folder on the tray beside me. This one was thin, just one document. I opened it. My birth certificate. The real one. And on top of it, stuck like a brand, that sticky note. Erase this if you can. Isolde never did subtle. She didn't need to be. She thought I was finished, but she forgot something important. Dead women don't make plans, but I did. The envelope still sat there, torn at the corner, the name, Mr. Fallon, attorney at law, barely legible through the crease. It wasn't much, but it was enough to point me in the right direction, enough to remind me that I wasn't done yet. I hadn't been sleeping. Not really. My eyes closed when the nurses dimmed the lights, but my mind stayed alert and calculating. I wasn't a woman mourning her reputation anymore. I was building a case, one piece at a time. A few days had passed since the last blow. The news story, the fake eulogy, the birth certificate with the sticky note that mocked me. Each moment since had been slow, heavy, and exact. I hadn't moved fast because I couldn't, but I moved deliberately. When a nurse left her tray behind after changing my IV bag, I waited 5 minutes, then inched my hand over and slipped the small voice recorder out of my drawer. It was old, one of Dad's, something he'd used back when he still kept his interviews on tape. I'd tested it earlier by recording the beeping from the heart monitor. The playback came through clean. I slid it back under my mattress, careful not to nudge the pressure pad that alerted staff if I tried to get up. I'd tried once and ended up with 2 nurses and a physical therapist swarming me within minutes. No, I couldn't move yet, but I could listen. They came in around 11 cats. Well, I knew they would. Darian walked in first, like he owned the place. He wore one of those dark suits that never wrinkled. His wedding band still on, like it meant something. Behind him came Isolde, heels clicking softly on the floor. Not rushed, not careful, just practiced. Neither of them noticed the recorder. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing steady. I was careful to look unaware. Darian stood beside the bed and looked at me like a contractor inspects a wall he's about to tear down. She doesn't look worse, he muttered. But not better either. Isolde sighed. She hasn't been conscious in weeks. The longer this drags on, the harder it is to keep everything in motion. She signed nothing, Darian said flatly. She doesn't have to, Isolde replied. Guardianship is set. The banks are processing the final transfers. All we need is Fallon's signature to release the Monaco property. Lake House is already reassigned. Darian crossed his arms. I still think this could come back to bite us. She's not legally dead. She's functionally dead, Isolde snapped. And the minute she is, we can close everything. Fallon's still loyal to the family. He won't risk blowing it up now. There was a pause. Then Darian asked, quieter, Are you sure she didn't leave a backup somewhere? A note? A file? Isolde scoffed. She barely knew how to sync her phone to Bluetooth, Darian. She was a good daughter, a sweet wife, but she was never the one who thought ahead. They laughed, and I smiled, internally, because they were wrong. I'd always known I wasn't the smartest in the room, but I'd been underestimated all my life, and that had become my advantage. After they left, I waited until the night shift changed before I pulled the recorder back out. I played the audio with headphones I'd swiped from the supply drawer the day before. I listened to the entire exchange, every syllable, every lie. It played back clearly. My voice didn't appear in it once, which was perfect. This wasn't my confession. It was theirs. That night, I barely slept. I didn't want to. I stayed awake long enough to wait for the administrative nurse to begin her 5 a.m. rounds. When she walked in, I feigned a bit more awareness than before, enough to signal progress, not enough to trigger a protocol. She smiled. You're improving, she said, marking her clipboard. I need a favor, I croaked, voice scratchy but steady. She looked startled. What is it? I need to contact Mr. Fallon, the family attorney. She hesitated. You're not cleared for— Please, I whispered. I'm of sound mind. You don't need to believe me. Just give him a message. Tell him I need to speak with him, urgently. And tell him the name of the doctor they claim signed my psychiatric certification. He'll understand. She stood frozen for a beat, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'll pass it on. No promises. It was enough. By midday, he called. His voice was dry, wary. May Rose? Yes, I said. My God, he muttered. You're alive. I'm a ghost, I replied. But I have evidence. I told him about the forged documents, the fake doctor, the guardianship papers I never saw, the transfer of the lake house, the voice recording. He didn't interrupt, not once. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. They've been using me as a pawn, he said. Everything came through Isolde, all signed, all certified. I never once thought to doubt it. You trusted her, I said gently, like I did. Silence stretched over the line. I'll be there tomorrow, he said finally, with a new notary and a recorder of my own. That night, I slept with the recorder under my pillow, and I didn't dream of drowning anymore. I dreamt of courtrooms, of spotlights, of microphones, of truth being louder than silence. When Mr. Fallon stepped into my room that morning, his expression held something between guilt and fury. He didn't speak right away, just pulled a chair up beside me and sat down with the kind of sigh you only let out when you've finally seen the full picture. He opened the folder slowly, like he was unveiling a grave. The first page sat there, crisp, unsigned, but clear. My name, everywhere. To anyone else, it might have looked like an old draft, a clerical mistake. But not to me. Not after everything I had lived through. Not after the fabricated will, the forged medical records, the obituary I had to watch on my hospital screen like a stranger. This document, was the original, the truth buried beneath a pile of lies, and it had my father's real wishes in his handwriting, with his notations, even down to the line he'd once said on the porch, to May Rose, for as long as she chooses to breathe. I looked up at Mr. Fallon. You read it? He nodded. Twice. I'm so sorry. I should have. You trusted her. I cut in gently. So did I. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. We're going to fix this. I'll make sure of it. But fixing wasn't enough anymore. I wanted it known. Isolde had spent months painting me as a problem. Fragile, absent, emotionally unfit. She hadn't just erased me, she made sure anyone who might defend me saw me as someone they were better off forgetting. But she had forgotten something. I was still breathing. And I had receipts. Literally. One of them lived in my memory. It came back clearly now, like a wound reopening. It was the Kensington Legacy Annual Gala, just a few weeks before my accident. I remember the envelope arriving in the mail. No return address, no personal note, just the program schedule and a small card with RSVP instructions. I almost didn't go. But something in me thought, maybe this was her version of a truce. A gesture. I had still been giving them grace then. Still clinging to the hope that we weren't completely broken. That night, I wore a navy dress, one my father had bought me years ago for a foundation dinner in D.C. I curled my hair and put on the pearl earrings my mother once said made me look expensive. As if worth came in accessories. When I walked through the main doors of the ballroom, no one recognized me. The check-in table was staffed by two women I didn't know. One glanced at the list, then handed me a lanyard with a tag already printed. Support staff, Emily K. I stared at it, blinked. I think that's supposed to be May Rose, I said, calmly. The woman looked at the badge again. Well, that's the only Kensington we've got under support. I bit the inside of my cheek. I could have corrected her, could have raised my voice, but the room was full of donors, colleagues, board members. I didn't want to be the story. So I clipped the badge on and walked in. The seating was arranged by contribution level, platinum, gold, silver. I wasn't seated in any of them. I was escorted to the back, near the service bar, behind a velvet rope. The servers looked at me with sympathy. One of them asked if I wanted a drink before the chaos began. I nodded. Champagne. Dry. No ice. Fitting. At 7:05 p.m., the lights dimmed. The MC walked out. The crowd settled. And then Isolde took the stage. She looked regal, of course, like a widow who had turned grief into leadership. She thanked the crowd, acknowledged their generosity, and then began a speech that sounded rehearsed to the syllable. "We are here to celebrate not just a building," she said, "but a vision, a legacy, a future built on strength and compassion." She named herself as the architect of the new direction. She named Darian as the executor of logistical operations. She named Sylvia, my former college roommate, as the foundation's communications director. She named everyone, except me. I had designed the original endowment structure for the foundation. I had co-written the bylaws. I had worked unpaid hours drafting grant strategies just to keep Dad's vision alive when the market was shaky. And I wasn't even a footnote. I watched it all from behind the velvet rope, a ghost, in a room I helped build. When the speech ended and the applause rang out, I unclipped the badge and left it on the empty bar counter. I didn't say goodbye to anyone, didn't ask for my parking validated. I just walked out. Now, sitting in this hospital room, that memory hit different, because I finally understood. That night wasn't a miscommunication. It was the start of the burial. And they thought the last shovel of dirt was the fake obituary. They were wrong. Mr. Fallon cleared his throat, pulling me back. "There's more," he said, flipping through the folder. "Copies of bank transfers, drafts of medical filings, letters of guardianship, all signed, all timed perfectly." He looked me dead in the eye. "She's been planning this for years, Mayrose." I nodded slowly. "So have I whispered. He blinked. "What?" I reached into the bedside drawer, pulled out the recorder, and handed it to him. "Play the file labeled Noon." He did. The room filled with the voices of Isolde and Darian. "Before the body goes cold." Already reassigned the house. She was never built for this. When it ended, Fallon sat back, stunned. "You've got them." "I do." He smiled. An honest, slow smile that almost made me feel like myself again. "We take this to court, publicly," he said. "Yes," I said, "but not before we remind them." He raised a brow. "Remind them of what?" I met his gaze. "That I'm still breathing." The minute Darian left my hospital room, I pressed the nurse call button. Not for medication or comfort, but for a pen. A simple pen. I needed to write everything down while it was fresh, before the adrenaline faded and my mind started second-guessing itself. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't slam a door or accuse me. But the way he'd said it, "You're going to destroy everything," was a confession in its own right. Not regretful, not frightened, just tired. Like a man watching a sandcastle erode in a tide he thought would never come. I scribbled his words in the margin of a notepad Mr. Fallon had left behind and underlined the one that stood out most. Everything. That was the word he clung to. Not me, not my health, not even my name, just everything. As in the estate, the control, the image they'd spent years curating. The story of Isolde as the grieving daughter, Darian as the loyal husband, the money, the properties, the power. But that illusion was cracking, and now they knew it. Later that evening, as I sat propped up in bed, Fallon returned with a folder that looked like it had aged 5 years in his hands. The corners were bent, the paper inside stuffed with notes and legal inserts, and his jaw looked tight, like he hadn't unclenched it in days. "They're moving fast," he said without preamble, "trying to drown this in countersuits before it even makes it to court, but we've got one shot to freeze everything before they liquidate the last assets." I nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. "Then we don't wait. File it." Fallon met my gaze. "You understand this will get ugly. Your sister is bringing witnesses, including Sylvia." That name cut deep. Sylvia Cortez. She and I had been inseparable for a decade, college roommates, maid of honor at her wedding, the kind of friend you call first when something's wrong, even if you don't know what yet. Until last year. We hadn't spoken since the fundraiser where she sided with Isolde during a heated debate over foundation spending. I thought we'd left it behind as a professional disagreement. Apparently, I was wrong. "She's testifying that you were unstable," Fallon added. "Emotionally erratic. That you made threats during your final board meeting." "She's lying," I said flatly. "Of course she is, But perception is currency, and Isolde's spent years shaping it. I stared out the window, watching pine trees sway beneath a dimming sky. The past year flashed in fragments, like broken glass I couldn't stop stepping on. Fallon, I said quietly, I never told you about what I found at the lake house. He raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? A week before the accident, I began. I went there alone. I didn't tell anyone, not even my housekeeper. I needed space. Something didn't feel right. I wanted to read Dad's letters again, to reconnect with the version of him that hadn't been filtered through grief and lawsuits. Fallon leaned forward. I lit the fireplace that evening, I continued. It was cold, and the house smelled like mildew. I was flipping through a drawer of old bills when I noticed something in the grate, charred pages. Ashes that hadn't fully burned through. Fallon's face tightened. I pulled them out with tongs. Some were tax records, maybe. But one, my voice cracked. One had his handwriting, his seal, the line that mattered. All properties, including the lake house, are to be given solely to Mayros. He closed his eyes for a beat. You're sure? I burned my fingers trying to save it, I said, pulling back the sleeve on my left wrist to show a faint scar. But the signature survived. You can match it. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a scanned image, and laid it on the table beside me. We already did. My breath caught. It's real, he confirmed, and admissible. The next morning, he filed the injunction. By noon, every Kensington account was frozen. The legal press caught wind within hours. And then, the vultures came circling. News vans began idling outside the hospital. Reporters tried to sneak in disguised as delivery men. One even pretended to be a cousin. Security tightened, and I asked to be moved to a private wing. Fallon arranged it within the day. That night, I sat alone in my new room, quiet, dark, and safe for the moment. I turned on the TV, not out of habit, but to witness the fallout. On screen, a headline flashed. Kensington estate frozen amidst legal scandal. Younger sister resurfaces in inheritance battle. Isolde's photo appeared. So did mine. An old college picture, grainy but defiant. The article speculated wildly. Was I back from the dead? Had I been hiding? Was this a smear campaign? I let them guess. Let them twist themselves into knots. Because the truth was coming, and it was uglier than anything they could imagine. The next afternoon, the door to my room opened. Darian. He didn't knock, didn't even pause to wait for permission. His face was pale, less groomed than usual. The man who once measured every inch of his appearance now looked like he'd slept in his car. You're going to destroy everything, he said quietly. I didn't flinch. You mean the lie? He stepped closer. We were protecting the foundation, the family name. You wouldn't understand the pressure we were under. Oh, I understand pressure, I replied. Like watching the man I married sit silent while my sister declared me mentally unfit. He looked down, jaw tightening. It wasn't supposed to go this far. But it did, I said. Because you let her convince you I was a threat. He looked me in the eye for the first time since walking in. You'll ruin all of us. You helped erase me, I said calmly. Now I'll erase your illusion. His mouth opened, then closed. No argument left. And in that moment, I saw what he really feared. Not prison, not shame. Exposure. I let him leave without another word, because I didn't need to say anything more. The next time I spoke would be in court, and this time, everyone would hear me. The courthouse smelled like pine cleaner and nerves, polished wood everywhere, everything meant to look respectable, dignified. But beneath that, there was the kind of tension you only feel in courtrooms where family sues family. Not over money, really, over meaning. Fallon had picked me up early that morning. I'd insisted on walking in under my own power. No wheelchair, no cane. I wanted every camera outside those doors to see that I was alive, not just breathing, but standing. You're sure you're ready for this? He asked as we pulled into the parking structure behind the building. I glanced down at my hands. The right one still trembled if I pushed it too far, but it could hold a pen and a truth. "I've never been more ready," I told him. Inside, the media had already swarmed the steps out front. Fallon's assistant took a back exit to hand off a brief statement to the press. "No comment until testimony," it read. We didn't need headlines today. We needed facts. The moment we stepped into the hallway outside the courtroom, I saw them. Isolde. In white, of course. Always white. Like purity had something to do with color. Her expression was unreadable. Maybe she thought she could still outmaneuver this. Or maybe she didn't think I'd show at all. Darian stood behind her, hands in his pockets, jaw set. No tie. No confidence either. When they saw me, Isolde blinked, just once, but that was enough. The courtroom was already half full. Legal staff, press observers, 2 rows of people from the foundation. Board members, I assumed. Faces I hadn't seen in years. Not since they stopped inviting me to strategy meetings and started transitioning leadership. The judge entered. A woman in her 60s, stern but fair. She glanced around the room, took one look at me, then nodded. "Let's begin." Fallon stood and began with the basics. Timeline, chain of events, medical guardianship granted under false pretense, forged psychiatric evaluations, questionable real estate transfers. Then he handed over the flash drive. "Your Honor," he said, "you'll hear audio of a conversation between the defendants. This recording was captured at Tahoe Medical Center without their knowledge, but within legal limits as Ms. Kensington was the subject of the conversation and retained full rights to her own room." The judge plugged in headphones first, listening alone. Her expression didn't move. Then she looked to the court clerk. "Play it aloud." And suddenly, their voices filled the room. Isolde. "She won't make it past noon." Darian. "Transfer the lake house now." Isolde again. "No witnesses, just paperwork." The silence that followed was louder than the audio. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes straight ahead. I didn't need their reactions. I needed the record to show what they'd done. "Ms. Kensington," the judge said, looking at me directly now, "would you like to say anything?" I stood. My legs wobbled, but I held on to the rail in front of the bench. "I remember everything," I said. "Every lie, every decision made while I was sedated, every signature that wasn't mine, every story told about me as if I were too broken to speak for myself." I looked at Isolde, who wouldn't meet my gaze, and I forgive none of it. There was no dramatic gasp, no gavel slamming, just stillness. Fallon stepped forward again. "If it pleases the court, we have one final piece of evidence." He pulled out the burned document I'd found in the fireplace, the one they had tried to destroy. The signature, charred but intact. Dad's seal still faintly visible in the corner. "The court has already confirmed its authenticity," Fallon said. "It names Ms. May Rose Kensington as the sole heir of the lake house and of the original Kensington Trust." The judge took a moment before responding. "Effective immediately, all asset transfers are frozen, powers of attorney rescinded. The estate returns to its original designation under this document." She paused. "And based on the recording and submitted testimony, I find probable cause for fraudulent manipulation of legal guardianship, forgery, and attempted misappropriation of estate." Gasps this time. Real ones. Isolde's face had lost all its color. Darian looked like he might be sick. But me? I stood a little taller, because for the first time in months, maybe years, I had won without yelling, without stooping, without erasing anyone. I had done what my father taught me. Let the truth do the talking. As the bailiff moved to gather documents, the judge stood to leave. Court was adjourned. I gathered my things slowly, not rushing. The cameras would be waiting outside, but I wasn't walking out for them. I was walking out for me. Isolde rose, but before she could turn away, I met her eyes. "You plan to end me by noon," I said, voice even. "But this is your midnight." And then I walked out, past the press, past the curious eyes, into the fresh California air. No reporters called my name. No one shoved a mic in my face. They didn't need to, because today I didn't just speak. I was heard. After that final sentence in court, after the cameras had left, and the reporters had packed up their microphones, I went back to the one place that never lied to me, the lake house. It was quiet when I arrived, not the eerie kind of silence, but the kind that makes space for breath. There were no more men in suits trying to appraise it, no more assistants repainting the shutters white, no smell of lavender-scented brochures stacked on a welcome table. It was just the cedar walls, the creaky floorboards, and the memory of my father's laughter echoing faintly through the breeze. Isolde had been sentenced to 8 years. Fraud, conspiracy, falsification of medical records. It was a hard fall from grace, even for someone who'd built her life on pretending she never stumbled. The courtroom hadn't needed much persuasion. Between the audio files, the forged documents, and her blatant financial maneuvers, even her own legal team seemed relieved when it was over. Darian didn't fight. He signed a plea agreement, turned over every asset that wasn't tied up in prenups and corporate shells, and vanished. The last time I saw him was through the rearview mirror of Fallon's car, standing outside the courthouse alone, hands stuffed in his pockets, watching the world forget him. Sylvia disappeared. No one heard from her again. Rumor had it she moved to Oregon, changed her name, started teaching part-time at a community college. The silence, in her case, was enough. There are some betrayals that don't require jail time to haunt you. Just a mirror. The court gave me everything, not as a gift, not as sympathy, but as restitution. The lake house came back into my name, but I didn't want it to be what it was before. I didn't want it to be just mine, so I changed it. 1 year after the trial, I stood at the front door of what was now called the Second Voice Foundation. The carved sign my father had made decades ago still hung crooked above the porch, though I'd asked the team to leave it that way. Imperfection had a place here. Inside, the rooms had been softened with warm throws, bookshelves, and natural light. There was a sitting area in the sunroom for journaling. A small library with donated books on healing, memory, and reclaiming narrative. A kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon and strong coffee. The house had once been a refuge for me. Now, it belonged to women who had nowhere left to go. Women who'd been erased by husbands, mothers, brothers, courts. They came here quiet, with eyes that avoided mirrors, voices that cracked when asked even simple questions. But over time, they softened. They sat by the fire and told stories no one else had believed. And the house listened. Photos lined the hallway, many of them donated by the women who passed through. One wall, however, held only 3 frames: my father's portrait, one of the lake house in winter, and the only photograph of me that had survived all the years of manipulation, untouched, unfiltered. It had been hidden behind an old painting in my father's study, found by a contractor during renovation. The frame was cracked, but I kept it that way. Scars made things real. That afternoon, I sat in the reading nook beside the fireplace. A quiet hum of conversation floated in from the kitchen, where 2 residents were talking about soup recipes. My fingers ran along the edge of an envelope I hadn't opened until now. It had been given to me by Mr. Fallon after the court proceedings, a sealed letter he'd forgotten my father left behind. The paper inside was yellowed but still strong, his handwriting unmistakable. Mayrose, if they ever try to rewrite your worth, burn their lies with your truth. This house is yours. But more than that, your voice is. Don't let them teach you silence. Love, Dad. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't move me, but because it filled me instead. His words didn't reopen wounds. They sealed something old. Not the pain of betrayal, but the part of me that once believed I needed someone else's permission to be seen. Later that evening, a new resident arrived. She was younger than most, maybe in her late 20s, with shoulders hunched forward like they were trying to disappear into her chest. A social worker had dropped her off and said little, just that her case was complicated, that she'd been sent from 3 other shelters, that she hadn't spoken more than 10 words in 2 weeks. I met her at the door myself. She didn't look up when I opened it. Just clutched the strap of her duffel bag like it was a life raft. "Hi," I said softly, stepping aside. "You're home now." She blinked at me, confused. I walked her through the hallway, showed her the bookshelf, the fireplace, the chair by the window that everyone fought over on sunny mornings. Finally, we stopped in the kitchen. I poured her a glass of water, handed her a folded paper with the daily schedule, and set a small card on the counter. It read, Your story matters here. She stared at it, unmoving. I didn't push. Before I left her alone, I said, "They tried to end me too. But you don't end with their silence. You begin with your truth." She didn't answer, but her fingers, shaking, tentative, reached for the card. Outside, the wind moved gently through the lavender field that now bloomed where the old tennis court used to be. The lake shimmered just beyond the trees, and I sat by the window, watching it reflect a sky that had once felt too heavy to bear. My scars remained, but so did my name, so did this house, and so did I. Some wounds don't leave bruises, they leave silence. But silence, when broken by truth, can rebuild everything they tried to destroy. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming your name, your voice, and your worth, when even the people closest to you try to take it all away. Have you ever been treated like you didn't matter by your own family? Tell me in the comments. Your story might help someone find the strength to speak up. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Your voice deserves to be heard too.